It is 8:45 on the west coast of the United States. It is 0345 GMT. We're going to spend an hour talking about the latest in recreational marijuana news, the fight for medicinal marijuana, the decriminalization in other places, and just general pot news, including tonight. I really like this topic. The 50 states ranked in terms of the price of pot. It's a really interesting article that I actually found just before going on the air and threw this in kind of the last second. So I haven't even really read all of it, but it's pretty interesting. Also, medicinal marijuana may not be something that's helpful for victims of dementia. We'll talk about that. All 50 states ranked by the cost of the marijuana, and other states where marijuana is news. The Oregon medical marijuana battles offer lessons for California. We have an article from the East Bay Express in the Bay Area of California. Special marijuana committee in Oregon has been created in the Oregon Senate to handle medical marijuana there. News in the medical marijuana fight in the state of Pennsylvania. Positive news if you're a proponent. And the Louisiana marijuana law also has changed, or is not changed, but the changes that have been proposed have now been endorsed by the full House there. This is a story we brought you last week, and I think that's actually where I want to start. We talked about Louisiana is one of those states where legalization of recreational pot is not on the table. Legalization of medical marijuana is also not on the table. However, the third tier, if you will, of the three steps of marijuana legalization. If the first step is full recreational pot, if the second step is medical marijuana for people with an actual doctor's prescription, then the third step would be decriminalization, or at least reducing the penalties for people caught with a small amount of pot, and certainly for first-time offenders. In this case, the proposal to reduce marijuana penalties for those convicted multiple times of possessing pot cleared the full House floor in the state of Louisiana in the legislature there on May 13th, which is the date of this broadcast. We are broadcasting to you May 13th at 8:49 p.m. now on the west coast of the United States. Let's switch to the article here, and you can see what I'm seeing. The proposal passed the House floor and is headed for the Senate in the state of Louisiana. The current law allows for someone to be sentenced up to 20 years in prison for getting busted and convicted 3 or more times with as little as one joint. Among the changes proposed in the legislation, sponsored by Democrat Representative Austin Baden of New Orleans, a reduction of the maximum penalty from 20 years to 8 years. Still a long time for your third time being caught with a single joint, 8 years in prison, but baby steps, as I was saying last week. It starts chipping away at Louisiana being the incarceration capital of the world, Baden said from the House floor after his bill passed. Now heads to the Senate. The House voted 53 to 36 to advance it. It drops the maximum sentence for second offense marijuana possession from 5 years to 2, and drops the maximum sentence for third offense possession from 20 years to 5. Subsequent convictions could allow for a maximum sentence of up to 8 years. Under current law, a first-time offender could spend 6 months in jail. First time for a single joint, 6 months in jail in Louisiana currently. Fines also would be reduced. Second offenses would be reduced from $2,000 to $500. Subsequent offenses from $5,000 to $2,000. The bill could save Louisiana taxpayers approximately $12 million in fines and incarceration costs. Similar bills have been brought to the legislature by the same guy for nearly 5 years now, but this year the Louisiana Sheriff's Association and District Attorneys Association, two influential groups for lobbying in the Louisiana legislature, worked with Baden to get the bill in a posture that they would not oppose. When his bill failed last year, the sheriff's group opposed it. Now they support it, or at least they don't oppose it. That's sort of the trickiness there, right? Again, we've talked quite a bit on this program about cops with their heads on straight, meaning by that cops that understand they obviously have bigger fish to fry, worse things, more important things to be dealing with in their everyday work, whether they're street patrol officers, whether they're detectives, whether they're guards in a prison, no matter what. Pot users in general are the least important criminals you want to be dealing with. And spending state resources to deal with, what essentially is, even in the states where it's on the books as a crime, to see it as any kind of reasonable crime, especially when you factor in tobacco and alcohol and the statistics thereof, the related factors thereof, you could really line them all up in a row, and you'd see addiction potential, addiction potential. You'd see also the body count. If you line them all up, the tobacco body count, how many people die of tobacco-related causes every year or every day? How many people die of alcohol-related causes every year or every day? How many people die of marijuana-related causes every year or every day? It's an important conversation to have. It's an important consideration. And when I talk about cops that have their heads on straight, even in states where something like medical marijuana is not legal, at least in Louisiana, it sounds like the police there seem to be getting their heads on straight finally, and understanding that there are bigger fish to fry and more important issues to be dealing with than users of pot with a single joint. Guy Baden originally sought to exempt marijuana possession as a consideration under the habitual offender or 3 strikes sentencing law. He changed it so that the lobby groups would sort of not oppose the bill. When the lobby groups stop opposing it, then the lawmakers decide to get behind it. He also learned that simple marijuana possession was actually not often applied as a factor in habitual offender sentencing, meaning that when you look at this 3 strikes law, almost never do you see pot possession in the sentencing under this habitual offender law. Another bill on the Senate side, sponsored by a New Orleans Democrat, seeks to lower penalties for small amounts of possession. J.P. Morell's legislation carves out a new section of the law that deals strictly with possession of an ounce or less of marijuana or synthetic marijuana. All the offenses would be considered misdemeanors. What an interesting idea that is, considering that pot users, if they're criminals, aren't felons. It's pretty fascinating, I gotta say. Let's jump over to the state of Pennsylvania, where they passed the medical marijuana bill in that state. Switching to the article here so you can read along with me. It's a pretty interesting development, I feel like, certainly in the situation that we've been following there in many states where they're considering medical marijuana. State senators today, or that would be yesterday, Tuesday, voted for a second time to send legislation to legalize medical marijuana to the House of Representatives, where the GOP majority has held hearings but otherwise has given no certain signs of support. The 40-7 vote came 7 months after senators passed an earlier bill that died in the House. Every Democrat voted yes, as did 21 of 28 Republicans, including Senate President pro tempore Joe Scarnetti, Republican from Jefferson, Pennsylvania, and Senate Majority Leader Jake Corman, Republican as well. Governor Tom Wolf, a Democrat who took office in January, supports the legalization of medical marijuana. However, leaders of the House Republican majority are not saying whether they support the Senate's approach or if they'll advance their own legislation. So again, just like you see in the U.S. Congress, the state Congress often has their own way of doing things, if I'm being nice. We have not looked at it, but we will once it gets here, said a spokesman for the House Majority Leader, Dave Reed, of, it says Indiana. Does that mean Indiana County? Or, I mean, it says our Indiana there. I don't believe that refers to the state of Indiana. This is in the state of Pennsylvania. So there may be a district or county or parish or city, Indiana, in the state of Pennsylvania. Man, is that confusing. Miskin also said House Republicans believe the federal government should take the lead on the matter, considering that it still classifies marijuana as a drug with no accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Many House Republicans are idiots. Senator Mike Fulmer of Lebanon, Pennsylvania, shot back the government should not stand in the way of a patient and or his medicine. I don't see anyone who could possibly disagree with that in the kind of rational or logical way. I think this is a states' rights issue, and I think this is a right of Pennsylvania to decide what they want to do and how we want to take care of our patients and how we want to allow our sick people to take control of their health. He says he believes the necessary support exists in the House to pass a medical marijuana bill thanks to the same people who propelled the Senate's vote, parents who believe a marijuana oil extract can help their children who are racked with debilitating seizures. According to the marijuana advocacy group NORML, 36 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized some form of medical marijuana. Under the legislation that passed Tuesday, a state board would be created to license growers, dispensers, and processors. We've covered that. Actually, that's been going on in various states, and we've covered that in previous episodes here. Senator Pat Vance, a former pediatric nurse who voted against the bill, said she suspects marijuana cannot do all of the things people want it to do. The American Medical Association and Pennsylvania Medical Society opposed the bill, and the American Epilepsy Foundation found that it did not significantly reduce seizures. Now, I know that's not what people want to hear, but those are the facts as I know it, says this former nurse. She also said that federal law makes it illegal for doctors and nurses to prescribe marijuana because it is a Schedule I drug, that banks would not take money from the sale of marijuana, and pharmacists would be replaced by yet-to-be-created dispensers. What kind of qualifications will a dispenser have? Again, all of these people asking questions in a state as though this has never been considered or effectively actualized in any other state, as though they are the pioneers in this theorizing and this lawmaking and this decriminalization effort and so on. What kind of qualifications will a dispenser have? You can hear the condescension in that question. I mean, obviously, qualifications of a dispenser will vary from state to state, but with 36 states plus Washington, D.C. effectively doing it, I find it hard to understand. I mean, that's more than half the country. All right, and if there were one or two states, if it were only considering the states where it's purely legal recreational marijuana, that's, what is that, 4 areas now? If you count Washington, Colorado, the first two, D.C., and then a couple of other states have done it more recently where it's still being worked on. This person, Vance, Senator Pat Vance, sounds like she's kowtowing to her constituents and not paying attention to perhaps the latest science. The newest bill includes tighter controls to track transactions and an expanded list of eligible medical conditions, including diabetes, Crohn's disease, and chronic or intractable pain, otherwise untreatable. It also expands the methods of delivery to include vaporization, along with pills, oils, liquids, gels, ointments, and tinctures. Edible products and smoking it would not be allowed. So even this is sort of restricting the two primary ways of doing it. Why? Because smoking must be bad, right? It must be bad, even though patients who have cancer and chemotherapy sort of issues where they cannot swallow things and keep the swallowed things down in their stomach because they will vomit, find enormous value from the ability to ingest it through the lungs. Now, this adjusted bill did sound like it was going to include vaporization. That's probably going to take care of that concern of mine. Under the proposal, patients would need a written certification from a doctor or nurse confirming they have a qualifying medical condition and are likely to benefit from a prescription. Now, let's go back to the story I was just looking at, because one thing is interesting here. They have a poll. Should Pennsylvania legalize medical marijuana? Yes, no, vote. Now, I'm not... will I vote, or can I just see the poll results without voting? That's what I would really like to do the most. This is not scientific, but 2/3 of the voters of 13,000 votes on this story believe Pennsylvania should legalize medical marijuana. The disclaimer here is probably something about surveys are not scientific and for entertainment only. Yes, there it is. Okay, that's really great. Anyway, so there it is. An interesting or related article coming up from WTAE, Channel 4, Action News in Pittsburgh, a state-by-state look at marijuana laws. Looks like that's got a slideshow. Perhaps we will come back to that in the later part of the program. You're watching 420 Legalization Nation. I'm your intellectual stoner host, even though I am broadcasting completely sober and have not had pot for a long, long time. I still support it. I still feel like it is one of those things that probably could help so many people, and it is merely because of this, the echoes, the sort of ripples of reefer madness, that stone of reefer madness that was plopped down in, what was it, the 1930s, maybe the 1950s, whatever it was. The ripple effects of that stone continue to resonate in some people's incredibly antiquated, archaic thinking, and I mean, it's actually pretty embarrassing when you look at the number of people that are either anecdotally or sort of in a more rigorous scientific sense helped by this substance. Who gives a crap if it's illegal according to the federal government? The federal government needs to kind of butt out. They need to work more on breaking up the big banks. That's something that I really do support, because those big banks that are too big to fail are obviously a much bigger sort of detriment when shit goes south As we learned in 2008, the situations going on with big banks being too big to fail is a much bigger problem than the federal restrictions of marijuana. Let's jump to Oregon, where we know it's legal for recreational purposes, but now in the Senate of Oregon, there's a special marijuana committee that has been created. This is to handle medical marijuana. Again, I feel like one of the, oh wait, I'm just correcting myself. Oregon may have been one of those states where they've legalized recreational pot, but it hasn't kicked in yet. Washington and Colorado are the two states where that is actually effected and underway currently. Oregon Senate President Peter Courtney, moving to end a legislative impasse on the sweeping medical marijuana measure, created a special Senate committee to deal with the issue. It's charged with moving a measure through the Senate aimed at cracking down on black market diversions by medical marijuana growers. The Senate House Committee on Implementing the Marijuana Legalization Initiative, approved by voters, has been deadlocked over the issue of how much power to give cities and counties to ban dispensaries and processors in their areas. That's happened in California as well. Senator Ginny Burdick, who co-chairs the House Senate panel and will chair the new Senate committee, thinks she can win a strong bipartisan majority on the Senate floor, which she said could help to sway the House in the state of Oregon. Burdick is a Democrat from Portland. She and other Senate members of the Marijuana Committee support letting city and county governments bar medical marijuana facilities. Citizens could challenge it by collecting 4% of the vote in the last governor's race in their localities, allowing them to place an issue on the ballot. I think that sounds pretty standard as far as citizen initiatives. In contrast, a majority of the House members on the Marijuana Committee say they want any local ban to automatically go to a vote of the people. They say they want to ensure the medical marijuana patients do not lose access to their substance. Burdick said she is trying to schedule a meeting of the new Senate committee Monday. She said senators plan to amend Senate Bill 964 with their language on medical marijuana. So there you have it. Again, you're watching the 420 Legalization Nation program. I sort of do this as a way of blatantly trying to get the station K-High in Colorado Springs to hire me. They have a number of locally presented marijuana-themed programs. In Colorado, it's completely legal to have any pot that you want for recreational users, especially as long as you are an adult, I should say. And many of the programs on that station are entertaining, but they very often have the purely hip-hop mentality where it's the weed pimps and it's all very sort of rooted in that universe. And I feel like there is a place for a intelligent journalistic, let's say college level approach as opposed to the high school level of some of the other programs. I actually very much enjoy listening to the high school level programs, but I feel like a certain intellectual discourse is missing from that discussion, and it's a little bit difficult for me to listen to that with my journalistic background and the beliefs and sort of knowledge that I hold, and not want to do something maybe a little bit different, a little bit more stimulating of the intellect. And I feel like that's what I'm trying to do here. Again, if you happen to be watching and you happen to know the station KHIGH, K-High, I believe it's 1580 AM in Colorado Springs. You can listen online or on the TuneIn app on your phone or tablet. I would love it if you could drop them a line and say, hey, there's a guy I happen to know who would be great on your radio station, and he does a locally sort of themed, news-based, intellectual, college-level show that is not meant as anything other than a simple journalistic look at these issues, because the news is changing daily, and it's not the same as the national marijuana news exactly. This is a more local style presentation, but of course I do look at the news from all across the country, so perhaps it is just like the national marijuana news for all I know. There's our look at the state of Oregon. By the way, Oregon is also seeing these medical marijuana battles, and the folks in the East Bay of California are now seeing those lessons and learning from them. Oregon's robust medical marijuana industry fended off the first round of post-legalization restrictions, but not without an all-hands-on-deck knockdown, drag-out fight that provides a lesson for California, says this author, David Downs of the EastBayExpress.com. Sources report Oregon Senate Bill 844 to inspect and restrict certain commercial medical collective grows failed to pass committee, but the medical marijuana growers will remain in the crosshairs of both law enforcement and the commercial recreational industry, mainly because medical growers leak tons of pot into the black market. Oregon enjoys the distinction of having the cheapest high-quality bud in America. Way to ruin my upcoming story of which states are, as far as ranking the states as far as their average pot price. $204 an ounce in Oregon compared to $241 in the San Francisco Bay Area, $346 in Washington, D.C. The national average, $324. While medical patients celebrate the access, officials chafe at the leakage. The problem is also in California, a state in which any adult can get a recommendation and appoint a grower as a caregiver. The grower can then legally grow up to 6 mature plants every 120 days. What is that, 4 months? And give the patient a free pound per year and then ship the rest out of state. Most experts agree California has among the least structured systems of rules and regulations of any state with a medical marijuana law, meaning that for some users, at least, a quasi-legal recreational market has existed for some time, according to Gavin Newsom and his Blue Ribbon Commission progress report in March. California 2016 legalizers must choose between angering the medical marijuana community with new regulations versus gaining mainstream voters who want to see the pot trade controlled a little better. Over in Arizona, 2016 legalization activists are already facing outright opposition from existing medical marijuana dispensaries, some of which don't want the increased competition of new recreational businesses or home grows. This person has heard some California medical operators privately say they support the status quo rather than further legalization. You can't blame them when, as one columnist notes, it is opponents of legalization largely in charge of implementing it. A pretty interesting paradox there, I feel like, when you talk about, okay, well, you have the medical marijuana and the people involved in the medical marijuana are against further legalization of recreational marijuana because it means additional regulation of what they do. For years, California's legislature hasn't been able to resolve the tension between the pot industry and cities and cops, let alone medical versus recreational legalizers. That unresolved tension could fracture and kill reform efforts in 2016, and lots of people stand to keep profiting from that. So in California, they're looking closely at what's going on in Oregon for darn sure, and maybe trying to, as they said in this article, learn lessons and work hard to avoid or perhaps head things off at the pass, if you will. Easing symptoms of dementia. What can be helped with medical marijuana? People have claimed glaucoma for a long time can be helped with medical marijuana. The problem with that is, in general, there are, I almost said legitimate medications, but let's just say there are pharmaceuticals that do a better job of reducing the pressure in the eyeball and relaxing it to the point where the glaucoma is not as much of a problem. So while glaucoma is on that list, it's one of those examples of, really, we have better ways of dealing with that in an actual, truly medical sense. And it's probably better to use another ailment if you want to try to get a medical marijuana card and use an actual medical basis to do so. Let's look at this, because an article from TheVerge.com, kind of one of those news blogs, if you will, is now talking about dementia. And is dementia one of those ailments where the symptoms can be eased with medical marijuana? Apparently not, at least according to this article. We don't actually know how useful medical marijuana really is. Well, part of the problem there, before I go on, is that obviously studies are hindered by the illegal aspect of the pot. So there is a stymied research that is going on, a stymied level of research because of the legal conditions involved. Medical marijuana has been approved for a range of potential conditions. In New York, it can be sought by sufferers of Parkinson's, HIV, epilepsy, and MS. Particularly in the U.S., though, legal restrictions and limited funding have made it hard to test its actual efficacy. In a study published today, as of May 13th, that is today, by the journal Neurology, researchers from the Netherlands say that patients with Alzheimer's or other forms of dementia might want to look beyond pot, at least for the time being. Early studies in mice and humans have suggested Tetrahydrocannabinol could alleviate some symptoms that accompany dementia, including agitation and motor control problems. That's probably true. Again, it's probably going to sound like it's going to be like the glaucoma issue, where there will be actual other medications that do a better job. Study co-author Marcel Oldreichert, a geriatrics researcher from Radboud University Medical Center, says these were either too small or not well enough controlled to definitively show a benefit, but they were enough to warrant a more detailed study because current treatments have dangerous side effects for aging patients. Many of the current treatments are antipsychotic medications, probably stuff like Haldol or haloperidol, which is obviously effective, but probably, could involve some very dangerous side effects, as most pharmaceuticals do. The team recruited 50 patients with dementia and without other severe illnesses. They put 26 on a placebo and 24 on 4.5 milligrams of THC in pill form every day. The study was double-blinded. Neither the researchers nor the patients knew which group was which. At the beginning, the patients' caregivers scored their levels of agitation and aggression. After 2 and 3 weeks, they repeated the survey, letting researchers compare the scores. The researchers noted that scores for patients using THC improved over the course of the study. Unfortunately, the scores also improved for the placebo recipients. There was no statistically significant difference between the groups. That's really the key, is achieving a statistically significant difference between the placebo or the control group and the experimental group. Patients weren't getting as high a dose of THC as someone smoking it recreationally or taking it for other medical purposes, but Oldreichert says it was comparable to previous studies about dementia. They suggest former results were biased by not being strictly blinded or were biased in another way. But they say it doesn't mean it's time to give up on testing THC for dementia sufferers. The drug was tolerated well, says Oldreichert, making it potentially safe to try in higher doses that could have real effects. There were no side effects, no feelings of a high, and with a sensitive gait and balance measures, they could only find minor changes. It also doesn't tell them much about potential benefits in other areas like pain associated with multiple sclerosis, which they cite as a better researched example, or epilepsy. It also shows that despite the broad potential of medical marijuana, we're still trying to figure out exactly how to use it. So we have that to worry about. It's not that they didn't get better, it's that they got better at the same rate essentially as the people in the placebo group. And when you get better at the same rate as the people in the placebo group, something else is going on, and you probably can't attribute any changes to the substance you're studying, in this case, the THC in pill form, known as medical marijuana. Okay. Halfway through the program, let's continue in looking at the news here. The look at all 50 states ranked by the cost of weed. They go ahead and give it away in the title, so that's why I wasn't too upset when the previous article actually ruined what I was trying to say. The hint, Oregon wins as far as the state. If I click on this, let it blow up. Actually blow it up here manually, and you can see what I see, and see that for instance, in Alaska, it's $294 for an ounce of pot. For instance, in Hawaii, it's $307. Arizona, $298. California, $242. But in Oregon, it's only $204 for an ounce. Where's the highest? I guess these darker states would be the highest. $360 in South Dakota, $387 in North Dakota. And that looks like the highest of all the states here. Oh, I see. So yeah, the 387 is the upper end of the key. So that kind of will tell you that the state of North Dakota, poor folks in North Dakota have the unfortunate distinction, I should say, of having the most expensive and probably the hardest ability to obtain an ounce of pot. I am unaware of the legal status of medical marijuana in the state of North Dakota, but it does look like if it's that expensive, it's probably against the law there. They warned us this would happen, says this article. The states where recreational marijuana use is legal are also the states where marijuana is least expensive. The price of an ounce of weed ranges so widely from state to state that someone who smokes an ounce a month can move from Pittsburgh to Portland and save enough money for a year's worth of premium cable, the perfect companion for their habit. This is in Forbes.com, definitely a reasonable and reputable journalistic source. The cost of buying an ounce of high-quality cannabis in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and Alaska all are less than $300 an ounce, less than the nationwide average of $324, according to priceofweed.com, a site where users anonymously can submit the cost of pot in their area, purchased either from the black market or legally through a dispensary. Despite a strong marijuana culture, Colorado has surprisingly not got the lowest prices at $204 for an ounce of high-quality pot. Oregon is the state with the cheapest weed, almost half the cost of an ounce in North Dakota, as we noted. In Washington, D.C., looks like the price of an ounce of weed is $346. Marijuana became legal for recreational use in March, but where commercial sale is still against the law. So I guess, what does that mean? Having it is okay, buying it is not. Is that the idea? Sometimes stuff like that's a bit confusing. Anyway, I do like that that's being measured. Here's let's look at some stories from the front lines as far as people who are being arrested or otherwise busted. This from Southern California, KTLA Channel 5. Man arrested after a marijuana grow worth $1.2 million is found in the City of Industry. Couple of things. First of all, there are many places where the city names don't apply to the beauty or non-beauty of the city. I think City of Industry is actually a much nicer city than it sounds like. City of Industry is a horrible name. Horrible name for a city. And by the way, also, I believe Adam Carolla, the comedian, commented on this. Riverside, they got about 6 more months to build a river, or else they have to change their fucking name, he said, because there is no river going through Riverside, California. In the same way that Riverside is not nearly as pretty as the name suggests, City of Industry is probably prettier than the name suggests. Let's go back to this article and go ahead and read about the bust, just because I feel like it's a good way to kind of check yourself to make sure we're aware of exactly how bad it is in places where people are still arrested for pot. And this is a pretty major pot grow. If it's at $1.2 million, this is not a minor deal. This is not a single sick person with a plant. A man in his late 40s was arrested in the City of Industry, according to the LA County Sheriff's Department. City of Industry is essentially a suburb of Los Angeles. The man's name is not being released due to the ongoing investigation. He was arrested after a search warrant was obtained for a warehouse in the 18,000 block of Railroad Street. Let's see the map, shall we? Well, there it is. Now let's zoom out. That would be zooming in. Here we go. Okay. And if I continue to zoom out, you can see the LA metropolitan area here. It's sort of to the north of Anaheim, to the west of Los Angeles proper. And it's right there, sort of inched between Pomona and Downey, or if you know Fullerton and West Covina, whichever cities you may know in the Southern California landscape. Usually people just think of LA as LA, but when you've lived in California for a number of years, as I have, you become aware pretty acutely and pretty quickly about what's exactly where. And people in California get huffy if you confuse, say, one city with another, or sort of things like that. Sheriff's deputies of the LA County Fire Department became aware after responding to, yes, a fire alarm call. It's usually those that set these things off. Responders smelled the overwhelming odor of fresh marijuana and saw various cultivation items, lights, chemicals, etc. A search warrant was obtained. Detectives found more than 300 plants in various stages of maturity. The plants were estimated to have a street value of $1.2 million. One arrested. And anybody with any information pertaining to the investigation is being asked to call LA Crime Stoppers, or text the letters TIP LA plus the tip to crimes 274637, or visit lacrimestoppers.org. Okay. There we have that. Let's continue going down the line here. Let's look at this story in the New Yorker. Delusional confidence, a report from the Marijuana Investor Summit. This ought to be pretty interesting. When we want to raise capital, said this co-founder of the cannabis company called Ebu, I go up to someone and say, would you like to invest in my company? Here's how it will work. 1, you may go to prison for making this investment. 2, I may go to prison and you might lose all your money. 3, our minimum investment is $250,000. Are you sure you want to play ball? There was nervous laughter from the crowd. It was the first day of the first Marijuana Investor Summit in Denver, and this person Wenshu, Duma Wenshu, was speaking at one of the most popular panels, raising funds. More than 800 people from around the country had come to the summit at the Crown Plaza Hotel near the airport. It was a testosterone-fueled crowd, mostly white men in suits, entrepreneurs mixing with hedge fund managers and venture capitalists. But there were outliers, an Orthodox Jew with a long white beard whose family in Philadelphia wants to obtain the first license to grow medical pot in Pennsylvania. An African-American man who spent 17 years on Wall Street, then left to grow pot near Detroit, and a female doctor who wants to start a practice treating chronic conditions with cannabis. All were convinced that the ongoing legalization of marijuana has created an opportunity for people with a high tolerance for risk to make a killing. 23 states and D.C. have legalized medical marijuana. 4 of those have made recreational pot legal. It's not legal federally, resulting in chaos and conflicting rules. David Friedman, whose Marijuana Investor News co-sponsored the summit, says, now is the time to get into the space because as soon as pot is federally legal and can be transported across state lines, the companies with deep pockets, tobacco and alcohol, will take over. We're all positioning ourselves to be bought up. I mentioned Adam Carolla a couple of moments ago in one of the jokes that he told, and I always try to credit a comedian whenever I mention a comedy line, because usually the comedy lines that resonate with me resonate hard, and whenever I repeat them, I certainly try to give credit wherever credit's due. And if I can't remember who said it, I usually try not to drop the line because that's unfair. I don't want to be ripping off. I'm not a comedian, but I feel like ripping off a comedian is not so very much not cool. It's not original. At any rate, what I was going to say about this was when I thought of Adam Carolla, I thought of Dr. Drew Pinsky. Dr. Drew Pinsky is sort of Adam's partner on the Loveline radio show of many years ago, which I really revere as one of my favorite radio programs of all radio. And many people know him from his HLN show. Many people from kids of the era when I was a teenager remember him from the TV version of Loveline on MTV, which was an abomination. It was horrendous. It was incredibly, incredibly shitty and not worth watching. Nowhere near the level of intimacy and help and humor that was provided throughout every hour of that radio show, Loveline. They called it by the same title, so that, I don't know, I mean, it seemed like the only effect that had was confusing the audience. Oh yeah, I used to watch Loveline all the time. No, I don't give a shit then, because if you watched Loveline, you did not experience the good Loveline. The good Loveline was only on the radio, and it did not spill over into TV. They had many of the same elements, but the chemistry, the intimacy, and the humor were not there. And I say that in all as strongly as I can, in a very profound way, because the humor and the intimacy, sort of the reality, was not there. The medical advice for kids who want to take ecstasy and have it just be okay, even though it will destroy their pleasure centers of their brain, that was there. But being able to really capture the humor of the radio show proved impossible. That was devoid of humor. It was not funny. It was not intimate. It was not clever. It was not interesting. It was horrendous. And, it was one of those MTV shows where the teen audience and the audience clapped and screamed after pretty much every sentence was uttered, in the way of a lot of modern day television, I guess. And it's just really kind of sad that they didn't call it something else. I guess the reason they were trying to capitalize on the success and, maybe indicate through the title what the show was going to be. But I really feel like that did was create confusion in a very serious way, because the dichotomy of how great the Loveline radio show was and how fucking shitty the Loveline television show was, it's a really huge dichotomy. Anyway, Dr. Drew Pinsky, I went on that tirade for a long time, and I still never mentioned what I was going to say. Dr. Drew Pinsky was commenting on big pot. We have big tobacco and big alcohol. You don't hear people say big alcohol, but you do hear people say big tobacco. The big tobacco companies, Philip Morris International and so on. Yeah, well, those are the companies that are going to become invested, it sounds like, with the medical marijuana industry, and certainly the recreational marijuana industry as well. So these are companies that are all trying to be in place so that big tobacco will eventually snatch them up and will essentially morph into big marijuana, big pot, as Dr. Drew used to call it. But back to this article about delusional confidence and the sort of venture capital of marijuana. Wenshu came to the cannabis space in 2012. Tall and rangy, with dark hair shaved on the sides, military style, he moves, thinks, and talks fast, jiggling his foot when he sits. After graduating from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs and then USC's Film School, he and a friend started a company, Secret Agent, and wrote and produced scripts for video games that grossed more than $2.5 billion worldwide. On November 6, 2012, the day Washington and Colorado made recreational pot legal, Wenshu said, "I knew things had changed forever. The train had left the station and you were either on the train or on the tracks." He sold his stake in the company he'd helped found and moved to Denver. Wenshu saw a problem that nobody seemed to be addressing: the unpredictability of the effects of marijuana. Pot consumers decide what products they'll buy by not how it tastes or smells, but by how it makes them feel, he said. But even when they find a product they love, the effects may vary widely depending on the crop and the dispensary. This is something I've heard talked about in various ways in the debate and discussion over medical marijuana, including on the radio station I want to get on someday, K-High. And that is this. One of the guys, his name is Bubba Cushman. He does the noon show. It's called High Noon on 1580 K-High. It's not a bad show. It's actually quite compelling and pretty good to listen to. It's a little bit slow. There's a female co-host who essentially does nothing but kind of laugh at his jokes and is a sidekick in the worst radio sidekick tradition. But, you know, she's not offensive in any way. She's just kind of there. And you know, I guess that's okay for those shows. If I were ever to have a co-host, I would want there to be a little bit more active of participation, a little bit more intellectual stimulation, a little bit more neuronal firing, if you will, going on, than that show seems to offer. But Bubba Cushman talked about how he is a Kush snob, I believe. Certain types of pot have this Kush in the title or the name of the pot. One of my complaints about pot is that the pot strain names, like the radio shows on 1580 K-High in many ways, kind of have this hip-hop culture woven into it in a kind of very inextricable way. It's got to be Bubba Kush this or Pip Daddy Granddaddy something that, you know, it's all kind of very similar, and it does not tell you anything. I mean, it's just the name of the thing. And if you buy Sour Diesel Kush Purple from one dispensary and Sour Diesel, you know, how it has the same name, it may be even from the same grower in a very real way. It may not, but essentially it's not going to really necessarily have the same effects. That's what this article is sort of pointing out, is that pot consumers decide what products they'll buy or not buy by how it tastes or smells. I just read that wrong. They decide what products they'll buy, not by how it tastes or smells, but by how it makes them feel. But even when they find a product they love, the effects vary widely depending on the crop and the dispensary, as this person said. Let's go back to the article here and finish it up before we get out of here. We only have a couple of minutes left. Wenshu said the effects may vary widely depending on the crop and dispensary. His father and grandfather are organic chemists, and after speaking with them and other scientists, he came up with the idea of distilling marijuana into its chemical components, cannabinoids and terpenes, to determine the effect each one produces. With his partner John Cooper, he started EBU, setting up a lab and hiring 5 research scientists whose mission was to, quote, create a healthier and safer alternative to alcohol that one day could be sold in bars and restaurants. After we distilled the plant into its basic components, we were able to combine them and create new products that emphasize one effect. The first 5 effects or feelings he plans to market are energy, bliss, giggle, chill, and create. I just want to go back to that, maybe say it a second time. Because of the different concentrations of these compounds, they think they're going... Do you remember, in the 90s, there was an oxygen bar sort of fad? Oxygen bars, where you literally go in, sit down, have a camulet, one of those things, the plastic tubes that go up your nose, and they pump alcohol into you, and you breathe oxygen. And they had very different types of oxygen, energy oxygen, and, you know, calmness oxygen, or whatever the hell. And it was all sort of very nonsensical. They just had these claims, but they didn't do anything as far as creating additional energy, and it was just kind of bogus. I wonder, it doesn't sound like this is bogus. It sounds like they're trying to be scientific in their approach, but at the same time, it doesn't. I'm a little bit skeptical based on the oxygen bar situation that I have myself experienced in the 90s when I was in college. But the 5 feelings they're trying to market initially are pot drink that gives you energy, a pot drink that gives you bliss, a pot drink that makes you giggle, a pot drink that makes you chill, and a pot drink that makes you create. This author also was skeptical when he heard this, apparently, she. How could he guarantee a predictable response to a psychoactive substance? Jake Brown, the cannabis critic for the Denver Post, had the same question. In my experience, marijuana is so intensely personal, people will have different reactions to the exact same plant. I've had readers become furious because a strain I found sedative kept them awake all night. Wenshu insisted that if you graph people's responses, there would be a bell curve, with most people having roughly the same experience. If that weren't true, antidepressant drugs wouldn't work. I asked if he could develop a product that didn't make you eat uncontrollably. He started to laugh. All of the high and none of the hunger, he said. A goal of ours is to eliminate the undesired effects of pot, like the munchies and paranoia. A cellular pharmacologist, Brian Reed, who works in the lab, explained that as he and his fellow scientists study how human cells respond to specific compounds, they may find a combination or dosage that will eliminate the compulsion to overeat. Wenshu said that's a complex product that they will take up in the future. At every keynote and panel address, the speakers emphasized the risks. Jamie Perino, co-owner of 3 dispensaries called Euflora, I like that name, said that there are new regulations and crises every day. That's normal, so you'd better have a temperament that handles stress well. When she opened her first store, her bank closed all her accounts and canceled her credit cards. Although some banks are willing to open for some cannabis firms, they charge about $10,000 a month in fees. No other industry has to pay fees like that, Perino said. Trip Kaber, who produces Dixie Elixirs, THC-infused drinks, says you need delusional confidence and patience to get through this. Thus the name of the article, by the way. It goes on a bit here. I don't know if we'll finish all of it. I guess we will. Wenshu spoke on 3 panels and had private sessions with investors, including an emissary from Snoop Dogg, a Chinese industrialist, and members of the Rockies Venture Club. The year before, he had felt he was begging for money, but at this conference, he left elated with 25 leads from accredited investors and 1 commitment. After hearing his pitch to the Rockies Venture Club, in which he said he could make his product for $2 a gram and sell it wholesale for $35, I was almost ready to plunk down money, this author says. Seeing, or in this case feeling, is believing, so I asked Wenshu if I could do a blind test of an EBU product to see if I could tell what effect it was supposed to provoke. He agreed, arriving at my home the next weekend with a vapor pen and a vial of EBU oil. I took 2 hits and tried to articulate what I was experiencing. It's not energy, it might be bliss, not quite, but I like what I'm feeling. Present, totally here. I'm never present, said Wenshu. I'm on my phone, 2 steps ahead, thinking about what's next. I laughed and realized I've been laughing every time Wenshu spoke. I guess I'd say it's giggle? It was, but 10 minutes later it felt a little like chill with a frisson of anxiety. We'll have to work on that, he said. We're trying to give consistent sensations. Reed told me later the product I tried was a very early formulation with none of the cellular research behind it that will apply to future iterations, thus it's bullshit. This is a little experiment of the authors, but it was a funny little anecdote. If asked if he has any doubt that this will succeed, no, he said. He described how Cortez, when launching his campaign to conquer the Mayans, sent his men ashore and sank all his ships so that there was no going back. That's my mentality. All the chips are on the table all the time. You can't allow yourself an escape route, or in a weak moment, you'll take it. What if the science doesn't bear out? If we don't succeed at that exact thing, we will pivot, he said, using the language of entrepreneurs. It may take longer than we anticipate, but EBU will succeed at something. So there you have it. It's been about 50 minutes that we've been covering the news of the week involving the medical marijuana, recreational marijuana, and decriminalization of marijuana here on 420 Legalization Nation. Join us next time. I'm your intellectual stoner host, and thanks for watching.